Well, thank you very much for joining us again for another FASD Awareness webinar. This month, we're going to be talking to three of the leading advocates of FASD in the world. And we have on our screens, we've got Maggie May, CJ
Lutke,
and Justin Shepherd. So thank you guys for joining us from the Changemakers. You've all had quite an exciting couple of weeks of late. And we're going to talk about some of the key areas that you've been working with. Maggie May, let me talk to you first, as you're a regular on here and familiar to all our listeners. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing over the last couple of weeks and why it's been such an epic occasion?
Yeah, so for anyone who knows me, I'm currently not in Ireland. Surprise, surprise. I'm back in Canada, and the reason I got to do this is I got to attend the 9th International FASD Research Conference in Seattle, where myself, CJ Lutke, were doing a keynote opening, and we had Justin Shepherd come and do the pre-conference. And we really got to bring the voices, and also we got to really, I guess, be the center when it comes to talking about things that actually we know firsthand in regards to all things stigma related. And, you know, we got to talk with researchers who, what was strange to me is a lot of researchers had never met anyone else really with FASD in person. So it was really cool to be able to be like, okay, look, we're not just data on a piece of paper, and actually know, you know, we're real people, we have emotions, we have feelings, and we're not this scary, you know, numbers, and that you can actually come up and talk to us and ask us questions. And it was really, I think I found it really important for them to be able to see actually we're people, and the influence that their research does impacts us in good and negative ways, and for them to know that, and also for us to be able to present them of, look, we want you to help us answer these questions, and we want you to focus research on this area because this is where it's really going to help us later down the line for years to come. So it was my first time attending like a proper research conference, and it was a lot. It was, you know, it was a lot of information and a lot of having to process, and I'm still processing all the different information, but I'm really excited to come back to Ireland, and of course to share it with you guys in the UK of, you know, some things I learned, and, you know, where we can go forward as including voices with FASD.
So we'll come back to some of the things. Thank you, Maggie May. CJ, you gave a presentation as well, didn't you?
Yes, I gave a presentation with Maggie.
That's right. And can you tell us the name of that presentation, because I love the title?
I think it was called The Elephant in the Room, Stigma.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What was the main feature? Obviously, we're talking about stigma here, but a lot of those that were attending the conference, nobody will understand the stigma that is attached to FASD, and the title itself, Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, kind of suggests that there's going to be a stigma attached to it anyhow, doesn't it?
Yes.
Can you give us a bit of a précis of what your key areas of informing people why the elephant was in the room?
So that we had an 80-minute presentation, and we talked about systemic stigma, insidious stigma, and operational stigma. We addressed the we addressed the Lancet article, and I don't think that article should be really talked of, because I think it's very damaging. And we kind of laid out from beginning to end how much happens both to us as people with FASD and to our life-giving mothers, whether we live with them or not. And just the amount of alcohol within society, and the absolute ubiquity with how everybody drinks, and culture that nobody wants to look at alcohol or themselves or the people around them, which is the elephant in the room. they keep going, no, 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 it's not there. It's not there. I mean, you know, look, life is great. It's not there. Those people are like just bad, you know, like they're outliers. But no, we are more representative of a society than people like to think.
And it's also, isn't it? It's about, you know, we don't want to look at a blame culture.
Yeah.
However, if people are going to take responsibility, we all take responsibility for our own actions. But if you're informed, if you're
Mhm.
better informed, and that comes from a higher level of government that creates that information, if you are better informed, you can make your own choices. And those are
Mhm.
usually, you know, frequently, if you're better informed, you make better choices. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. Addiction doesn't care whether you know or not. It doesn't. Addiction is a terrible, terrible um, illness to go through. And I will use addiction as an illness. Um, you can love with all your heart, but there is a life-giving mom that said to somebody about drinking. Now this woman has since passed, and to me she's a you know, I don't want to sanctify her because she would not like that, but she is a personal hero based on the absolute work she did and absolute life she's given back to so many people, that she said, I love my baby. I loved him so much, but the alcohol loved me more. So you can be informed all you want, but there are forces out there that will counteract that information. And just I just think it's sometimes just pure luck that someone's not addicted or somebody has taken this seriously, because you don't have to be an alcoholic to have a child with FASD.
Exactly. And that's a really interesting point and an important point, because how many mothers do we know that are birth mothers that we have connections with that didn't even know they were pregnant
Yeah.
and had a lifestyle that was involved alcohol as a recreational fun time, and they didn't realize they were pregnant for quite some time. I'm going to come on to Justin and welcome Justin. It's lovely to have you on board as well, Justin. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in the conference? And you gave another speech yourself, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Thanks for having me, by the way, Andrew.
Thank you for joining
Great
us.
to be here. Yeah. To kind of piggyback off of the question you just asked, CJ, about information and stuff, I do think it is vital when it comes to our decision making and understanding ourselves. Something that I like to do in you know, in my advocacy that I feel like is very helpful to me and some others, you know, in getting information across, is trying to pull out a little bit and not focus on the micro, but trying to pull out and see the macro, the bigger picture. So I gave my talk on in relation to stigma. I think that there's two other things that we don't talk about a lot when it comes to disability, in particular to FASD, and those two things are complicit bias and dehumanization, which are very relative and tied into stigma, which is why I went and gave my talk ahead of, you know, Maggie and CJ's. Stigma is the big one, right? We tend to focus a lot on that, but we don't tend to focus on where these things come from and why people that are living in the world of FASD or deal with this disability on a daily, like why we still struggle to have these conversations. And when you get into dehumanization, which is the talk I gave, it really ties in almost like a Venn diagram with complicit biases, dehumanization, and stigma, right? They all stem from different parts of the brain and how we understand each other through daily interactions and such. So, you know, stigma is the big one. Dehumanization is more the approach from the subconscious that I believe happens when people are not paying attention to those parts of their brain where complicit biases and stuff kind of generate and catalyze into certain thoughts as we interact with people with disability, and how those thoughts create different types of interactions, and how those types of different interactions lead to stigma and that full-on separation. So I think having the most information you can have, like CJ said, to her point, I mean, it's not going to stop anything. It's just going to give us a greater understanding of how we deal with something that's going to always be here and be a part of our culture and part of our world. As long as there's alcohol and as long as people are able to get pregnant, there's going to be FASD existing. So the more information that we are armed with, though, I would argue that, you know, it does help, right? It does help mitigate. It does help slow down waves of it. And I like to use, you know, autism as kind of an example, be it that they don't really know exactly how it's caused, but they're trying to figure it out. But if they came out tomorrow and said that it was, I like to use this crappy analogy, but like if they said it was peanut butter that caused during eating peanut butter during pregnancy, I mean, what do you think would happen?
Yeah.
All people would stop consuming peanut butter and be like, hey, that's, you know, that's dangerous. It would can cause harm to your kid. You know, I think, again, when we get into the stigma, now we're talking about, we know what causes FASD, right?
Yeah.
It's alcohol. And why are we having such a hard time having conversations about that, when I think humans kind of innately know? I mean,
Yes.
people innately know that this is a teratogen that is more damaging than all the rest of the teratogens combined. So we just need to find a way to get over that hump, because it obviously boils down to how we have a relationship with alcohol culturally, how intrinsic it is to us, and how important it is to protect, you know, unborn children from it. And I think
Absolutely.
that rests on the family and the husband and everything else. So anyway.
Yeah.
And we know that we're frequently surprised at how few people actually understand what FASD is. Even people in positions of authority that should know still don't know. And we've got this over the other side of the pond to you guys, and it's a universal thing around the world. This is what we're finding, isn't it, with these sort of conglomerates that we work with, and groups that we spread and share our understanding around the world. So I'm going to come to Maggie May. Maggie, you do a lot of work with young people and adults in your support groups and in your friendship groups that you host. And sometimes we talk about stigma, and frequently you will get probably a greater input from the wider community on what those stigmas are. What have you found to be the trend, if you like, of a certain sort of stigma that is attached to FASD that you actually face, and those with an FASD diagnosis face?
Oh, so many. I think some of it, you know, even so growing up, you know, there was a stigma of that I had to grow up to, was I would either get locked up or knocked up by having FASD. Of that was my outcome in life. I was never going to be able to be a successful human being. Those are my two options. And for me, I was like, no, I'm not gonna. Sorry, no, that's not for me. But I think also, you know, the fact that, you can only have FAC if your mom has a drinking problem and things like that, where actually you're cutting off so many individuals who won't get a diagnosis, or you know, they'll struggle, and you're cutting off ways for them to know, so that they can find other individuals like them, where they can like in the friendship groups, where they just talk and they realize, hey, I'm not alone, and actually I'm not the one going through these struggles or these challenges. Also things like, you know, oh, you have to have the facial features. If you don't have the facial features, you don't have FASD. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works at all. Less than 10% of us have the facial features. So to only hook onto one aspect of it is wrong, in my opinion, because once again, you're alienating such a huge proportion. And I think it's so important to move past that. And I think that was a huge thing that was at this conference, was the fact that people were like, no, I'm sorry, we've been here for the last 50 years since FASD had a name, but nothing's changed really. There's things that, we're still focusing on the facial features. I'm like, no, we need to move past that, because we have to stop. We just have to stop, just only looking at one proportion when there's such a larger proportion who need just as much help, support, understanding, but also for individuals. I mean, in our French group, I remember because we're a global one, in our one that I run, we have people from all over the world, and it's amazing to see when they first come in and, they don't want to say they have FASD because they feel shame, they feel like embarrassed, they feel, oh my gosh, I'm going to get judged and I'm going to be seen as not a full person. I'm going to just be seen as, oh, I have meltdowns or all of these. And then the next month they come back and the first thing, oh, I have FASD. And also everyone's like, so do we. And it's just like, oh, it's not a bad thing. Oh, okay, I don't have to be scared to say it. And it's about helping them on their journey to become advocates themselves, but also talking to them about, when you go out into the big world, you are going to face these stigmatic people who have these very stigmatic thoughts about FASD, and that, it's going to hurt. I mean, I was hurt by so many things of, online in particular, they'd be like, oh, we'd be judging people on, oh, your face doesn't look right, so you have FASD, and it started to be used as an insult. And that was triggering me, where I had to take off time on social media, because I'm like, I know, sorry, I actually have the facial features, and okay, I'm going to try to educate you. And the amount of abuse and backlash I got because they just wanted to use it as a stigmatic thing and didn't want to see a bigger picture. And I'd love to think that, in 20, 30 years, maybe as a society, we'd move on from judging people based on one aspect and actually just, as Justin's presentation on dehumanizing, people with FASD are humans. We have feelings. We're not just this one thing of a stigmatic phrase that's our whole outcome. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely. CJ, Maggie was there suggesting that stigma influences your willingness to announce your diagnosis.
Yeah.
You've been an advocate for quite a few years now. How many?
Since the dinosaurs.
You're one of the longest standing advocates, and one of the didn't you start up the Changemakers?
Well, I'm not
one of the
going to
founders.
I'm not going to take credit for that. There were a group of us, and we decided to take things into our own hands. Miles and Emily and Kat, and Justin Mitchell. Yeah, no. Piggybacking off what Maggie said, I remember in grade 2, I was no, it happened before that. I was 5, and the National, which came to our house and did a profile on us, because there were like scads of kids in the house. And grade 2, when that broken cord came out, there was an interest, and I was in a newspaper. So it happened quite early, and in our house, it was always talked about, because I had lots of people, like lots of siblings with it. So it was just, an everyday conversation. As I grew older, there was a part of me that was ashamed of it because of all this stigma and the, in high school or school, you learn pretty quickly where you are in the social pecking order. But I was always different. And so there was no point in me trying to be otherwise. So I guess that helped. Like I could not, what we in the disability era past, I had braces, I had, everybody knew in the tiny school. It wasn't till, and it wasn't till like later in life, because I went through the same motions as a lot of people. There was one point I was ashamed of having FASD. I was very angry at my life-giving mother for it. And it wasn't until the panel birth moms talked about their lives that I kind of pulled my head out of my own behind. And, there's more to life than just my struggles, but my struggles were defining things. After that, I decided that I couldn't be shamed by it. Like I decided not to. And it's not an easy, like when you're, it's not really easy to go from being ashamed to like deciding not to be ashamed. But once you make that choice and you stick to it, it does get easier. You're still going to get so much flack from society, and even people going, oh, well, you don't really have to say that. Well, no, I do, because I'm a person, and I'm, the statistic is 1 in 20. Somebody else with this. You just don't have a name for it. You don't have the context for it. I will by not outing myself, that sounds weird, but I will give you context for somebody else you might know. I really do it again. To your point, Andrew, is if you know more, you do better. I'm going to say in certain instances, because if addiction is a very different outlier to know better, do better, right? Because of the hold addiction has. That's what I was referring to when people drink sometimes, and even they don't know they're pregnant. But as knowing people with FASD, they don't know people with FASD. We're almost like a cudgel that's being used, like the alcohol is a cudgel to be used to stop women from drinking. Like women don't believe this will happen because they don't see FASD except for in the very negative and very like tiny spheres. But there are so many of us who have been impacted with it, and I'm losing my little thread here. But yeah, no, people will come up to me and I'll say, I have FASD. And my favorite line that they always use is, oh, but you don't look like you have FASD. I'm like, actually, I have all the FASD. Like it's all right here, right? Like I have the facial features, but they're looking for some epically dysmorphic outlier to what regular people look like that they're not
what are
seeing
they
it.
expecting?
You know what they're expecting, and
Yeah.
like what Maggie said online, it's being used as an insult. We've been collecting online comments from various spaces about FASD because we're also mythologized. We're a myth. We don't exist unless we fit that thing, right? We have to be a Hydra or something, or a Medusa, or a so I'm actually losing my thread here. So
No, thank you. You've answered it absolutely. When you're looking at hidden disabilities,
Mhm.
this is one of the challenges that you face across the board, isn't it? And we look at a spiky profile with FASD as well. So you have your areas of excelling in, and other areas where you will absolutely crash in certain.
Oh yeah.
And that can vary according to the time of day. It can work on at anything at all. Justin, can I ask you? You run a business in film. Can you tell us a little bit about your business? And because the reason I want to ask this question is, do you find stigma in your workplace?
Yes, I mean, it's everywhere anyway, and it's such a pervasive topic, right? And I go back to an interview I did with Dr. Ken Jones, who originally published the article about fetal alcohol syndrome almost 50 years ago, right? And we were having a wonderful conversation. He is very much these days focused in on stigma as well, and he brought up a very valid point, which kind of led me to my dehumanization thought process, which is, stigma's a very primal cultural necessity, right? Stigma is born out of necessity. The problem is it hasn't evolved with our evolution civically, right? Or societally, right? It still lives in that very primal place, right? Originally, it was just like two cavemen, one murdered somebody else, and they were like, the whole tribe decided that's bad. That was the origination of stigma. They didn't know why. They just knew like that's bad. So that person was ousted. Right now we have this much more complicated system that we live in, right? And going back to labels, and that you had brought up before talking with Maggie and CJ, I mean, you have to stop and ask yourself, like, in what ways does FASD societally benefit us by wearing that label? It's almost nil, right? Like, with the exception of this scenario right here, where I'm proudly able to say I have FASD. I'm proud to say I'm one of the ALC Changemakers. I'm proud to say I have a lot to say on this topic, and I want my voice to be heard. But as I say in my dehumanization talk, if I walk out onto the street and I meet a random stranger and I say, hey, I'm Justin, you know, we're going to have a normal conversation, right? Now, if I walk out onto the street again, and this time I introduce myself as, hi, I'm Justin with FASD, that's what we need to stop and talk about. What's going to happen in that interaction now? The one before, where I just introduced myself as Justin, fairly benign, I think, you know, interaction, right? Like, just normal, you know, because there's a chance they could have FASD, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest, or that they have some disability or some sort of, you know, deficit that they deal with on a daily basis, right? And but if I go introduce myself as Justin with FASD, then what is that doing to that interaction? What's happening inside of that person's brain that is changing our interaction? Are they viewing at me differently? Are they starting to talk with more apathy, or are they wondering what's wrong? Like, you know, what's wrong with them? What happened to them? You know, all that stuff. So it does change interactions. And that's where stigma gets really tricky nowadays, is that we're not really looking at it. It's still just this primal basic thing that's happening in people's brains. And we haven't figured out the key to unlocking why is it happening, and how do people go about addressing that stigma, right? That they're not meaning to even happen. So again, it starts with those implicit biases that we're having, you know, and then those catalyze the dehumanization. Now all of a sudden you're not seeing me as a full human. Maybe you're accidentally seeing me as less than. What are his deficits? And that's another thing we talk about with FASD a lot so much, is we focus so much, as to what you were just saying, Andrew, we focus so much on our deficits. We talk a lot about where our downsides are, where our downfalls are, where medical, mental, all that stuff, right? I mean, and that's born out of research and necessity, right? So that people can accommodate to those things for us, right? But in reality, when you bring that out to society, it's not really helpful to us, right? Like, we need to be seen as mentally tough, physically tough. I've survived multiple surgeries, same as CJ. A lot of people that, you know, have gone through living with FASD and having the physical ailment, we've all made it through. We're all here today. You know what I'm saying? We keep fighting and pushing forward. And as I spoke about in my talk as well in dehumanization, you know, I think we're mentally tough, we're physically tough, we're perseverant. We're probably the most perseverant group of humans on earth, in my opinion, because we get up every day. We don't get a vacation from this, right? Like, we don't get a break away from it. You know, we don't get to go take a few days and no FASD today. You know, it's like every day we get up and get out of bed, we're dealing with it in some capacity or another. And so, you know, we're perseverant, and these are just things that don't get focused on. And we're people pleasers, yeah, and that's also that's a double-edged sword, right? That leads to gullibility and vulnerability for us, but also these are things that you want to see at the top of anybody's resume, you know. And like, you know, we don't give up on problems, you know, and this is one of them. How do we overcome stigma? How do we inject FASD into society as people living with it, and get their acknowledgement about it, get their advocacy, get their help, get their awareness, while also having them overcome the stigma and the ideas that they have and the dehumanization that they're dealing with in regards to us, not just us, but anybody that has a disability, right? And I mean, I go as far as to argue that every human that exists on earth has a deficit of some sort that they're dealing with, whether it's anxiety, depression, maybe you don't have good vision, maybe you have bad dental, maybe you have arthritis, diabetes, you know, there's a billion things out there. And like, these things aren't getting stigmatized. And some of them are things that people are doing to their own bodies, you know? And so, but nobody has any problem with any of that. It's just when we start having this conversation about alcohol. And so I think it's very important, and I'll finish on this. I think it's important that we as an FASD community are very clear in our messaging that we're not coming for your alcohol. We're not asking anybody to change anything. We're asking you to focus on the fact that there's the most prevalent disability probably in the world that's underdiagnosed, not known about, that it exists, and that we're struggling with it. Like in the US here, I know it's different every part of the world, and Canada's done a better job, Australia's doing a better job, but in the US, it doesn't even serve me to have an FASD label from a DSM standpoint or from a disability standpoint to get disability. I'm better served saying I have autism or something else, because I'm more likely to get disability and services to me or my child or whomever it is that is having FASD. So there's almost no upside right now, in the US at least, to saying I have an FASD. But yet we're doing it because people need it so badly. And so when I first came out, I'm a late life diagnosis. I mean, I've been around FASD for a long time. I made a film about it to bring it back to what you were asking me, and I have a company called Make It Better Productions, which now is mostly focused and joined in with the Changemakers NPO, and we're going to be doing some stuff on that front. But I didn't know I had FASD until I made a film about it, and I went around and I had this whole idea, this preconception about it in my head, right? I was still living in the facial dysmorphology world and the whole, I wasn't seeing it for the spectrum that it was. It took me traveling the entire United States, interviewing multiple people living with FASD, caretakers, scientists, psychologists, FASD United, Proof Alliance, all of these different people, right? And I started like gradually going, wait a minute, that's what FASD? I think I might, is it possible? I came home to my wife, who's a researcher. She has a PhD in FASD, essentially. She's done one of the largest animal studies on it ever in regards to gender. And I came home and said, is it possible? And then when we sought out a diagnosis and I got it, it was so beneficial to me because everything became more clear, and it was like a weight lifted off my shoulder. But at the same time, a new monkey showed up on my back. And that was the stigma of, how am I going to go from being viewed as this neurotypical, accomplished person to saying, hey, I have FASD. So when I first did it, I felt I was shaking. I'm going to be honest with you. Like I announced my thing on a webinar in front of 500 people for Proof Alliance, and just said, yes, I've recently been diagnosed. And then I started feeling things, and I started experiencing stigma the way that CJ and Maggie have dealt with their whole life. I started feeling it from people that I knew because they knew me before my diagnosis and after, and I could very clearly see the difference in the way I was being treated. And that's not just in my workplace, that's everywhere. That's everywhere, even sometimes the people closest to you. And so it's very important that we talk about what's happening in the brains of human beings, whether you have FASD or you don't, when we're talking about accepting this disability and getting it out there and treating people differently with it.
Do you know what? Thank you very much. Thank you there is so much to unpick there, because I think your experience, your wealth of experience, has thrown questions in my mind about my behaviors. And, we set up a charity to support individuals and families living with FASD that had no support, no understanding. They were living a very isolated life, and we brought people together. Now, in the early stages of setting up a charity, we found that we wanted to come away from the stigma and that blame culture. And in order to come away from that, every time you mention stigma, people are aware of stigma. But I'm absolutely with you on this. This is why we created, we're having this webinar today. And I'm sure this is exactly why you've been presenting at the conference in the way that you have. The stigma is there. And so therefore, we can't bury it under the carpet. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to make people aware of it. But then we want to go, okay, look, this is what we're living with. And you've made it very, very clear there, and very eloquently, I might add. And and then you deal with it, and we have to assess our behaviors better. And that's where you throw those questions out to us and we go, right, what am I doing? What am I doing to accommodate this? I think something else that anybody would be looking at, I know Maggie May, we've done a lot of presentations and training online together.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talk about is the 8 executive functions and how somebody with FASD has to manage those executive functions very differently from somebody that's neurotypical. And so when you're analyzing your behaviors, analyzing your actions, and then having to manage those at the same time, as you said, Justin, every day you have to get up and get on and do this. And there'll be times when your anxiety levels are so high because you're thinking, okay, I can't remember this, I can't remember that, I've lost my train of thought. All of this is going on. And then, as you say, Justin, somebody comes in, if you mention FASD, there's an immediate assumption, isn't there, that somebody is going to have. And it's as somebody that is working and supporting and advocating for families and individuals living with FASD, that the more informed people are on every aspect of this, certainly with our training that we present, Maggie May, surely people will become better informed and therefore understand how to communicate more effectively. Because I'm very conscious, if I'm talking to Maggie May, I don't want to be condescending in any way. As you pointed out, Justin, as well, I have many of my own failings. I've made a career out of working on the areas that I excel. And some of my best musicians that I have taught over the years and worked with have been neurodiverse. And some of them have had FASD and probably, with the knowledge that I have now, had a diagnosis or didn't have a diagnosis of FASD that I might have thought, well, maybe they would be today. So Maggie May, when we're looking at your anxiety levels and coming in on what Justin was saying there, those feelings of people judging you and making you feel less of yourself. You've had, and you've explained to us through your life of how you've progressed and your journey. We understand that and we can see that on previous webinars. But what I want to say to you is when we get evaluation on our training webinars, the overriding positive evaluation is saying what an amazing young lady that Maggie May is. Her explanations of understanding her own condition and how it manifests, they're full of praise. And it's not a condescending thing at all, because I think that's how I interpret it. But we frequently, many people don't analyze themselves well enough. Many neurotypical people don't analyze themselves well enough. You're constantly doing that. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, and I very like I'm honored every time I get a really good evaluation, but I'm also a little bit cynical of, I think if you don't have a disability, you think it's wrong to criticize someone because if they have a disability by saying, actually, you know, they didn't do a good job or whatever, because, oh, you're picking on someone who's disabled.
Yep.
So I always kind of I'm grateful for it, but I pull that apart, being like, there's no way I was that good. Because even I can analyze, sometimes I do webinars, I'm like, that was not my best work at all. Actually, I really struggled. My brain was floundering. I was all over the place. I didn't answer any of the questions. And yet I'm getting these, you're amazing, amazing. I'm like, no, I really wasn't. And I'd actually appreciate for people to be like, you're great, but actually in future, we would have preferred if you'd done this, or actually I really struggled to keep up because Maggie went down 436 different rabbit holes to try and explain one question. But I think that's also stigma in regards to, oh, you can't say anything negative about someone who has a disability because you're picking on them. But yeah, it's also like Justin was saying of when you say, "Oh, I have FASD," it's the anxiety in yourself. And okay, how is this going? How is this person going to react? It's the anxiety of, oh, okay, are they going to be one of those people who think all the worst things about people with FASD, and they take 10 steps back and think it's contagious, and they think I'm going to rob them or whatever, or do the worst of the worst, or are they going to be someone who's had some kind of being informed about it, and they'd be like, okay, yeah, I've heard of FASD. Actually, my cousin's sister has FASD, so I get it. It's really that anxiety, and I think a lot of self-advocates have to go through this. Of when we go to conferences, webinars, events, and we put our vulnerabilities out there of I have FASD, and it's really funny to see. I people watch. I love people watching. It's terrible. I'm great at it, but I love people watching when I say, oh, I'll be at a conference and some people don't know me and it's about FASD, and then, people come up to me and be like, yeah, I also have FASD. And it's this, you can see them, their little brains ticking of, oh, okay, how do I talk to her now? Oh, okay. And they get so scared of saying the wrong thing or acting the wrong way. Like, as you were saying, you always are really making sure you're not condescending, talking down to me, but you also know you need to keep me on track and I don't take offense to that. We're like, Maggie, we're moving on because you've lost the train of thought or whatever. And I don't take offense to it because I accept that. But it's the anxiety of having to deal with that every single day because, like Justin and CJ are saying, FASD doesn't disappear. We live through it every day. And every day, I say at least one person I have FASD because it's either I'm in the supermarket and I'm having anxiety issues because I don't have the right coins, or it's taking me loads and there's long. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I have FASD, I have a hidden disability. Please just give me 10 seconds to get my train of thought so I can get on. And it's either they're going to be like, okay, that's no problem, or like, I don't care, get on with it. There's a queue behind you, and it's anxiety, and it doesn't go away. I mean, I've been doing this nearly 10 years, and I still have anxiety every time I have to go into a room and say I have FASD because I don't know how informed they are. I don't know what stigma they believe or have heard. I don't know what their own personal experience with FASD is. For all I know, they could have kids with it, or they themselves could have it, or they could have had the worst of the worst experience with dealing with someone with FASD, and I don't know that. So it's really something to think about when even facial expressions give 100 things away. Words, no, facial expressions give it all away. If I can read them, be like, okay, it's going to be one of these scenarios. Okay, time for me to get my little script out to deal with this scenario. Okay, let's do it. But yeah, it's exhausting some days, but I also wouldn't stop doing it because if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? And I think it makes it easier for younger kiddos and adults who have just been recently diagnosed to come up after me, or down the line when I finally decide to retire at some point, and being like, it's okay to say I have FASD, and people aren't going to take 10 steps back and think it's contagious.
Can I ask CJ? There are so many things that are throwing around my mind, and I love this when I'm talking to you guys because, we through our charity we have a Be Aware campaign, and I'm often thinking, are we doing the right things by you in our Be Aware campaign? Do you feel, Justin, I think you're probably the greatest advocate of this in your filmmaking because actually you live with this and you get everything fed into you. So therefore, this is your voice being heard. As a charity in the UK, we focus very much and work with Maggie May and many others, and through our webinars as well. We want to understand more. And, that is so that your voice is heard. And do you think awareness campaigns are sending the right message, CJ? To avoid stigma, that is.
Certain ones recently have. I don't remember. I think it was the Red Shoes Rock. They had like just a whole bunch of people saying I'm so and so and I have FASD. Those ones are, it shows a range of people, both with features and not features, and I really liked that because you wouldn't know, like, the average person, even if you did have features, you wouldn't know. So it's just saying, like, it could be anybody, right? Which was really interesting because it destigmatized the facial features. Other campaigns, you know, they have really good intentions, and I'm not going to, I don't want to like be harsh on them, because I think the meaning was very good, but the one we talk about was the 100% preventable. And you know, if you go online, there's a picture of me and I have that sign, and this was maybe 10, 20 years ago. I'm old. And you know, at the time it was like, yeah, it can be prevented, like, you know, kind of think before you drink. But since then, we have found out, like, yeah, it is, I mean, it's correct. It's 100% preventable if you don't drink, but is it 100%, is it right to say it's 100% preventable when alcohol is being literally marketed to, you know, women who are of birthing range, you know, in their 20s and 30s as this great lifestyle, and it's a lifestyle that they're being advertised. And so I think advertising and campaigns can be very double-sided. I think what we need, and I've talked to Justin and Maggie, it's just absolute a more representation, I'm going to say, in the media, more positive representation in the media, more characters that we can see ourselves in. Right now, you know, we always talk about, you know, everyone talks about representation. Everyone talks about wanting to see themselves in something. And that's what happened in like the 70s and 80s when people started, you know, including people who were gay, and real storylines that didn't just signal them out as gay, but they had full lives. They had emotions and experiences, and it didn't shy away from some of the harsher experiences. And with people of who have autism, you know, and I do think that the autism community, I'm not going to speak for them, but I think it is a double-edged sword there, because unfortunately they went from being these, you know, people who were strange to people with great abilities. And now, unfortunately, everyone's talking about how, you know, if you have autism, you must be great at math, you make great at science, you're going to be like a Sheldon Cooper. And it's not true, but you need a well-rounded person. And again, everybody wants to see themselves represented. And media is such an easy, consumable way to give somebody maybe like a pamphlet's worth of information in a character, if that makes sense. That would be the best campaign, is to just humanize us and humanize our life-giving mothers.
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
CJ also talked about this, which she probably doesn't remember, but I do. When it comes to awareness campaigns, it's also about, you know, not scaremongering people.
Yeah.
The worst of the worst, because in the best of intentions, things like, okay, you know, cigarette packets, they have the worst of the worst diseases that you can come out of if you smoke. And it's, you know, it's shocking. It's horrific, the pictures and the campaigns and things that they use. But when it comes to FASD, there is some scaremongering of there's one that was debunked, thankfully, of we're going to be dead at 34. And that's still making its rounds. And that was an awareness campaign of, hey, these are FASD, da-da-da. But I think a proper and campaigns that work is where individuals can watch and be like, that's me. I'm that person. I'm that person in that video. It's covering both aspects. It's bringing awareness, but it's also showing strength of people with FASD. It's not all about the doom and gloom. Is everyday living with FASD a basket of roses and absolutely peachy? No, we have good days and bad days. But it's important to highlight that it's not always going to be excellent, but it's also not always going to be really bad. And it's finding that balance. But it's also, when we're creating these campaigns, it's thinking about both sides of, hey, is someone going to watch this with FASD and feel really bad about themselves? Is it going to give misinformation that's going to fall back to, oh, I mean, the amount of people I have to deal with people with FASD having anxiety of, oh, I'm turning 34 tomorrow. Am I going to drop dead?
Yeah.
And just this anxiety. And sometimes people don't think of the effects. And that was 10 years ago that study came out, and it's still affecting our lives today.
And that's something that I know when we've, again, one of our training presentations that we give an explanation of FASD, how it's created, all the different, the science, the facts and the stats. And then we look at a section on prevention. And we asked you, and we worked with you on how do we seamlessly move where we're talking about prevention without being disregarding the fact that there's a whole array of people with a diagnosis of FASD. So, you know, you're looking at prevention, but you're also respecting the fact that there are people living with FASD, and actually their lives are, they've got their strengths and they've got their weaknesses like everybody. They are people, for crying out loud. And I'm going to come to Justin now, if I may, because one of the questions that I think that maybe the stigma, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, the actual label, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, the name that you brought up earlier, that you said, you know, it was generated all those years ago, that title, do you think that in itself has created a stigma? Do you think there is maybe an alternative title that is an alternative label, if we want to call it a label or a diagnosis, that would be better suited to avoid the stigma?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And honestly, Andrew, I think that there's a lot of people talking about that right now, some in good ways and some in bad ways. And as was seen at the conference, there was some controversial stuff brought up in regards to this. And it has been pitched before by researchers and psychologists. Of course, the combination of words, you know, it tends to, if you made it into a compass, point a finger at the mom, the birth mom. And that's not necessarily fair, right? I mean, to say it, but it is an accurate term, and it is the term that we've already been using and fighting for, and that we've accepted as labels. And at the end of the day, it's just, to me, you know, I have my own opinions that I will say, these are my own opinions about language surrounding FASD and anything that's a hot topic, right? When it comes to the language, I feel like sometimes it's a bit of putting the cart in front of the horse, right? I mean, and this comes back to something you said. I feel like we start talking about the language, you know, I'll use the LGBTQ community, right? Plus community. So, you know, we're at a stage right now where in evolution where we're not talking about people that are homosexual being communists, right, in the United States anymore. We're well past that. Now we're to a refined point to where we're saying, how do you like to be referred to with your pronouns? That is an evolution, and it's kind of like, you know, it's where the fight is right now. It's at the language. Right now, to me, with FASD, it's like we're having these conversations about this stuff like that. I feel like maybe we should be talking more about how are we going to, who cares what the 4 letters are or whatever the label is to me, when nobody knows what it is anyway, except for this group of people that is stuck on. And again, I use this in my talk as an analogy, like we're on a carousel, right? And the people living with FASD are stuck in the middle, watching people come on and get off, whether it's researchers, psychologists, psychiatrists, awareness advocates, whomever it is, getting on and off and on and off and off, and nothing's changing for us. You know, nothing is changing for adults and youth living with FASD. I feel like it's paramount that we shift focus to that. And then if we're going to talk about awareness and language surrounding it, let's stop and be real with ourselves for a second and talk about how important it is until people know what it is. Right. You know, again, autism kind of used to be a bad word, right? Like, you know, and people would call the police on someone that was stimming in a park. I use this example a lot, as someone pointed out, like, but now we know, like, and as CJ pointed out, now we're like, oh, you have autism, you must be highly intelligent. You know, are you able to solve complex math equations in your head? You know, which is true for a lot of
A
people with
badge of
autism,
honor
but
now.
also not true.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, again, you know, we've already come forward with this label. This is our label right now. It is fetal alcohol, and spectrum disorder is the part that gets ignored, right? You know, because it's changed from fetal alcohol syndrome to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, because now we know 9 out of 10 people don't show facial dysmorphology. But I think I wanted to come back to something you had said before. And I think this is important from my perspective as someone living with this and having campaigned for it and trying to make films about it and educate people about it. When I made my film in 2020, it was because RAND had just released a study that there was an uptick in maternal drinking during the pandemic of 41%. And so we're like, oh my gosh, everybody was like, there's going to be a huge wave of, you know, FASD in this generation. And what can we do to get out there? Now, I wasn't, my film at the end of it, the FASD project, I just asked people, what do you want people to know about FASD? And they said that it's preventable. It's not 100%. Nothing is 100%. There's no absolutes in anything in our entire existence, right? So moving away from the 100% preventable, while objectively could be true if we removed alcohol from the entire world, which will never happen, it could be 100%, but that's never going to happen. So it's never going to be 100%, right? So now we're talking about like stigma, labels, all of these different things, the language surrounding it, and it is important to us, right? These things are important to us within our own world, but something you said, which I think is the key to helping us get off this carousel. People that are, I think we'd all agree here that the world of FASD around the globe is a fairly small community, right? Like comparatively, you know, I mean, we all know each other. Like if you list your 5 people in the United States, I'm going to know probably 3 of them. You know, if I listed people in the UK, you're probably going to know 3 of them, or maybe all 5 of them. Who knows, right? It's a fairly small community. So I think that I'd propose that something you said, are we dissecting our own thoughts enough? I'd say no. I'd say even, and I'm going to lump us with FASD, living with it as well in that group. All of everybody involved in the FASD community, whether you have it or you're a caretaker or you're an advocate or a psychiatrist or a doctor or whatever, I think we need to start going in and dissecting our thoughts, because that's where all of this is coming from. Then we can build a roadmap once we know how we're thinking about it and seeing it, you know, because a lot of people would say to themselves, well, I don't do that. I would never have biases against my own kid, or, you know, but maybe you do. And maybe it is hard to think about, like, and going back to what Maggie said, like, it's hard when you have FASD and someone gives you this glowing thing, or you know, you get like a positive response to something. It's like, well, are they placating because I have a disability, or do they genuinely feel that this was amazing? And I think it's a mixture of both. And I think that if we take a look at why we feel the need, if you're neurotypical, to placate instead of being open and honest, because we want that equity, we want that equality, right? We want to be treated like we're normal when we walk into any room, or we're in any sort of business setting or conference setting or anything, on a podcast, whatever it is. We want to feel like we're here with everybody that's neurotypical, because we are. The way that we're up here is that we are extreme experts in this topic, because we live with it every day and we have thoughts and opinions on it, and we know how it impacts us individually all across the world. You know, like the Changemakers can say to that, like, we have people all over the world, and we know how it is in Australia, we know how it is in the Netherlands, Canada, the US, UK, you know, New Zealand. You know, we're all over the world coming together, bringing our experiences together. Now, once we do that, now the next people closest to us are the caretakers, advocates, doctors, people that are working and fighting for us. What are they doing, looking at their thought processes? You know, what do people with FASD need to do to look at our thought processes, right? And break that down. That's the only way we're going to address stigma. Otherwise, everything else feels kind of moot, right? Like, we have to build a roadmap. Let's say stigma was our enemy. Know thy enemy. How do you know thy enemy without, like, going into your own brain, which is hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not this is a huge task, but I just feel like there's only one way off of this carousel, and it is to take a look, at the way that things are within our own community and our group, and the way that we're talking about things and addressing things, and really digging into that subconscious so that we can understand this better and be very real with ourselves and have real, interesting, hard conversations in our own groups here, like we're having today. Like, this one's not necessarily hard as much as it is fascinating, but like, I think that there is something to be said about how do we go about getting into your subconscious, really dissecting your thoughts about how you're viewing the person, whether you have it or you're taking care of someone who has it, or 15 people who have it. Like, how are you viewing them? Then once we know that internally, then we can take that information out to the external world and have a much better explanation and roadmap for how they can deal with it. I feel like a lot of times we get so locked in, like, well, how are we going to get the rest of the world to know about FASD? And even if we do, what are we going to do then? What services do we have lined up? These all things need to happen in an alignment. And we have to start somewhere. And the only place we can really start is the place we're in control of, which is within ourselves and our own knowledge. So anyway, I'll quit rambling.
Today, you three, I'll include myself in that because I'm part of it. We've had that discussion. We're having that conversation, and we're looking at starting that roadmap. Let's work with that roadmap, and through your advocacy and our work across the globe, let's keep this conversation and make it with lived experience at the core of everything, the living experience at the core of everything that we are doing around the globe to create that roadmap. Thank you so much for your frank and open and honest conversations. I love that we can do this because, as you say, through those examples, we are all able to have a greater understanding and find and create that roadmap. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you, Maggie May, back soon. And I wish you guys all the best. We'll look forward to having you back on for future webinars. I've found this absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you.